Hello, everybody, and welcome to the reality show brought to you by the Ayn Rand Center UK, where we apply the practical philosophy of objectivism to current events. And today we are continuing our coverage of the war in Israel. The topic for today's discussion is Israel pursuing collective punishment? It's certainly been a hot topic for the pundits, at least in America, to talk about. I'm sure in the UK, guys, you might have gotten the same sentiments. The idea is that it's moral to separate out the population that lives in Gaza and claim they are innocents, and make them distinct from Hamas, who are the bad actors, and to attempt to surgically strike Hamas while preserving as many innocent civilians' lives as possible. Now, there are a bunch of questions that I think arise from this premise, and we're going to deal with all of those. Is the population of Gaza truly innocent? Can you even make such considerations in times of warfare like this? Is that moral? What should our moral considerations be with respect to the populations of Gaza or any population that we are at war with? Morgan, I want to start with you. I'm sure, it seems the UK is on fire with lots of anti-Semites, lots of pro-Palestinian protesters, lots of sentiment for the Gazans, and a sort of sense that people feel a sense of camaraderie with the suffering of the Gazan people, and I want to mitigate that suffering, and by making it incumbent upon Israel and the United States to protect as much of the civilian population as possible. What do you think about this as a moral ideal?
I think it's mistaken, and particularly the idea of collective punishment. And you're right that it's in a lot of the UK. Not only have we seen it in the demonstrations, there was an article by Hamza Yousaf, who's the first minister of Scotland, which is the part of the UK I live in, that he wrote in the New Statesman, basically alleging the same thing. And obviously this is quite close to him because his family was caught up in Gaza very recently. But unfortunately, so this is something that's voiced by the political leadership as well. I think the idea that this is a collective punishment is the wrong way to think about it. I think it's probably a deliberately wrong way to think about it, to try and cast moral aspersions on Israel. Collective punishment is something that's almost by definition unjust. It's the idea is that you're punishing people who didn't commit the crime. However, I don't think that's the right way to think about it in war. And also for the question of, is the population of Gaza actually innocent? I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of evidence that should make us doubt the idea that they're innocent. Just to draw a comparison that's very clear with Nazi Germany, I think it's very hard to say that a lot of the German population was innocent of what the Nazis did. The Nazis won elections, after all, and anyone who cast a vote in favor of the Nazi party is very culpable for the things they went on to do. And even a lot of the people who then didn't stand up within situations that are reasonable, and who didn't voice opposition before the totalitarianism set in, for example, and the people who just kind of turned their head because they kind of didn't like the Jews anyway, and so on, are people who are culpable for what the Nazis did. And if you look at the 2006 elections for the Palestinian Legislative Assembly, Hamas won the votes and were the single largest party, so they won about 44%. And then Fatah won 41%. And then some other parties winning small percents aside from that. So, and Hamas and Fatah are both parties of armed struggle and of wanting to liberate Palestine through violence. So an overwhelming amount of the population voted for that idea. And which, so for a premise of violence, and for a premise that is what's led to the continuation of the conflict in its present form. So I think there's a lot of reason to say that actually the population shouldn't be considered innocent. I've got some more to say, but I'll leave that there for now.
Yeah, it seems like the Geneva Conventions even puts the combatants who are fighting people like Hamas in an impossible position. It holds them to an impossible standard that somebody who isn't directly engaged in the hostilities is somehow not responsible. But you make a very valid point. If you voted for these things, if you support them, if you turn the other way while atrocities are going on, you are responsible. You're an accomplice to that kind of society, to that kind of murder. Marco and Richard, what say you guys to this?
Well, the whole point of raising the issue about innocent victims is only comes out after there is a response from Israel. Nobody ever bothered to worry about the victims of October the 7th in the first place, and now we're talking about victims. But the point here is that talking about victims in a conflict is a total red herring. The moral case here for Israel's behavior is totally black and white. There's no debate. What Israel is doing is the moral thing to do, and that Israel in this fight is the moral agent, the most moral of the two sides. Now, 50 years ago, Ayn Rand answered a question saying that if you could insulate the consequences of the population from the action of their own government, that would be the neatest trick on the planet. If you accept the fact that Hamas is the government of Gaza, and the people in Gaza make up Hamas, and people from Gaza left Gaza and went into Israel to kill innocent Israelis, what are we talking about here? We're talking about the moral onus on the people living in Gaza to engage against their government if they don't agree with them. And of course, they're going to be so-called innocent people in Gaza. There are children, there are people who are probably unable to think, people brainwashed, and perhaps people who even don't understand, don't agree with the Hamas policies, and perhaps people rational enough to reject Islam as a whole. But the bottom line is that their moral duty would be to overthrow the government of Hamas and join the fight against Hamas on the side of Israel. And as I said, we can explore it later on, but the moral agency here is on Israel's side.
I think what I find notable about this is the selective use of language and who and when it's applied to. And that term collective punishment is very selectively applied. When Hamas fighters, or whatever you want to call them, militants, aim a rocket at Israel, as they've been doing for the last years, shove a rocket in and fire it randomly across the border at Israel, are they not collectively punishing the other side? When people in Western countries shout at or attack Jews on the streets of London or New York or whatever, are they not collectively punishing the opposing tribe in the same way that they're decrying in these circumstances? For me, I think the term collective and tribal are almost interchangeable in many of these circumstances, and that exposes some of the problems here. I think on the subject of words like resistance, again, they're always talking about resistance against Israel, but not resistance against Hamas. And where you can find innocents in Gaza are surely those who are resisting Hamas. Now, I can't tell you how many there are and the extent to which there exist, but I'm talking about people, informants, people who provide intel to Israel, to people who undermine the government of Hamas and do all that they can to make sure that they're not facilitating, aiding and abetting those in Gaza to continue to rule them and to conduct this regime in the way it has been.
Well, it seems to me that the problem then is as an altruist one. If you're successful at defending yourself, you're bad. If you're unsuccessful at attacking, to the degree that Hamas is incompetent, Israel is far more competent in defending itself. That leaves the altruist very upset. That it's the ones who are competent who are it's incumbent upon them to restrain their behavior when dealing with utter and total savages, people who reject moral philosophy, they reject modernity, reject everything that we hold sacred. I mean, if anybody thinks that the population as a whole is somehow innocent, just listen to the testimony of some of the hostages, or watch some of the footage that Hamas has posted themselves, where they're parading naked bodies of people through the streets, or even live hostages and the hordes of Palestinians, of Gazans, who are surrounding the trucks, spitting on these people, hitting them, beating them. The children hostages have come back and said they were beaten by people publicly, by lots of different people, and they were secreted away to different hideaways. So lots of Gazan citizens participated in the infrastructure that is enabling this hostage situation to continue right now. Why isn't this, which seems self-evident, why isn't this self-evident stuff affecting the reporting on this on some of the left-wing news, Morgan, and why isn't it changing the opinions of some of the folks who have bought into the Palestinian narrative?
Well, lots of reasons. I think partly people are confused. They don't really know how to think about conflicts like this in a clear way, and that's not fully their fault. There's not a lot in the culture which does think about it very clearly, but also I think some people actively want to support Hamas and are sort of very culpable for this, and some people have this kind of like pseudo 60s hippie give peace a chance kind of attitude where no matter what the conflict is, they will support the side of peace, ceasefire, stop the conflict now, even if there's a just side in the conflict, a side that needs to win, and then therefore they end up perpetuating the conflict. So I think that's part of why they do it, and part of the confusion point, I guess, is that I think people who don't think these things through very clearly are probably taken in by the idea of a collective punishment, because it's corrupted concepts like this are used in such a way that they will seem persuasive if you don't really think it through. So, because if you think about it, any war is a collective punishment by this understanding of what a collective punishment is. It's not just this war, although the allegation is that this war is a collective punishment against the Gazans. Any war would be a collective punishment, and yet that's not the right way to think about it. And Rand had a very definite perspective on this, which I think is very radical and uncomfortable for people to accept, but she viewed government as the agent of the citizens, and so therefore she thought it was very incumbent on people to care what their government was doing. And I think basically she thought that people are culpable for their government's behavior, and if it's really as bad as this, if you don't stand up and do something about it, that ultimately the just side in the conflict in fighting against your representative is able to take actions which might result in your death, and that's fully justifiable, and that isn't best understood as a collective punishment.
Now some of the skeptics and moral relativists out there will shoot back with that kind of philosophy with something like, doesn't that justify 9/11 then? Wasn't Osama bin Laden, after all, responding to America's occupation of Kuwait and their continued presence in Saudi Arabia? Doesn't that mean that he was acting justly?
Yeah, I think, well, they probably will say that, but that's to ignore that Osama bin Laden is the representative of an evil cause, and the United States, no matter what its mistakes or the genuine bad things that it's done, is not the side of destruction, not the side of evil, not the side that wants to go about wantonly slaughtering people, whereas that is exactly what Osama bin Laden wants to do. And you could understand 9/11 as being a collective punishment, but there's a key distinction to be made of the moral side in that dispute, and also that 9/11 isn't directed in any way towards achieving some kind of objective. It was pure nihilism. It was simply an act of murder. Even if civilians are able to be justifiably killed in a conflict, it isn't just for the sake of it, which is clearly what 9/11 is. It's to reach the objective of victory, and in some way, and Israel has been very articulate that whenever they've taken strikes which have taken civilian lives, it's because they're killing a soldier, they're destroying a military installation, and so on and so forth. So there's no way that you can understand it as wanton slaughter. So I think anyone who represented the view you described would be mistaken.
Yeah, but Marco and Richard, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Wasn't Osama bin Laden fighting for a larger cause? I mean, Morgan says it was just pure nihilism and murder, but wasn't he fighting to get the United States out of Saudi Arabia, to encourage all Muslims around the world to rise up and fight for that special Islamic republic that they all want to put on us?
Yeah, and that's exactly the issue. These guys are not fighting to make a better world. They're fighting. I mean, what's Hamas's purpose? Is to install a theocratic dictatorship. Is to expand the theocracy from from the Mediterranean all the way to Tehran. They're not fighting in order to free the people and give them a better life. They're not fighting to promote individual freedom and human rights. They're fighting for a theocracy, and this makes Hamas an illegitimate government. Every government which moves away from protecting the freedom of the individual is an illegitimate government. People don't have the right to vote themselves into a dictatorship, don't have the right to vote themselves into slavery. If they do that, then free countries, if they are affected by this decision, have totally the right to attack them and get rid of them. You cannot justify a war from the side attacking a freer country. Here we have a bunch of medieval savages wanting a theocracy, i.e. wanting the rule from God upon man, and they want to impose it to a group of people, Israel, who lives a Western lifestyle of freedom and open society. The West is not free because God decided to make it free. It's free because up to 2-3 generations ago, people made the choice to lay down their lives to fight fascism and Nazism. This has not happened by accident. The French resistance stood up against the occupation of France. The students in Tiananmen stood up to the policies of his party. Mandela stood up to the fascist regime of South Africa, and they were on the right. It was their moral right to fight against an immoral state which all wants to do just enslave people effectively.
I think religion's a key element to this. I mean, if you take the fact that the same phrase is uttered by an Islamic terrorist about to blow himself up as by the woman who's just had her baby killed in conflict. Now, if there's no distinction between what you're going to say in one circumstance and the other, the fact that you're going to claim God is great, this is God's will, and you're going to wail at the sky, then you've got no thinking at all. You're simply seeing yourself as a pawn of God, of revelation, of determinism. Therefore, how are you going to be able to change? How are you going to implement change if you are only ever a pawn, only ever swept along by what happens to you? And the other point I wanted to make here was based on what you were saying earlier about the woman, naked woman dragged through the streets of Gaza and the crowds cheering. Now, if you saw such an equivalent scene on the streets of London or New York, it would be impossible for the same cheerleaders who support Hamas in our Western countries to come out, because they wouldn't be able to blank it out in the same way that they're able to blank out what happens over in Gaza. Somehow they're able to separate that from reality and not recognize it as happening. Whereas if it were happening on the streets of London, they would be forced to recognize what's really going on here and recognize what terrible evil they're supporting. I think that's kind of telling too.
Well, Marco, you stole my thunder, because my reality check is dropping right now. What gives Israel the right? And you echoed my thoughts, and that not spoiler alert for anybody who heard him talking just now, but you echoed my thoughts, because objectivists, I think, have a unique take on this whole situation, and the way we boil down what makes a state legitimate or illegitimate, I think, is fundamental to this argument, and fundamental even to arguing with moral relativists who think that one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. It's not true. Whether a person is a terrorist or a freedom fighter is dependent entirely upon objective circumstances that you can actually look to and see for yourself. So Ho Chi Minh, not a freedom fighter. George Washington, freedom fighter. There's a difference, and you have to make those distinctions in your mind. Mary Ellen, $4. Thank you very much, Mary Ellen. Kathleen with 2 pound, says, what about all the fake videos made by civilians? This is true too. There's been massive propaganda campaign from the civilians of Gaza. One of the girls, who's I think in prison right now for harassing an Israeli soldiers, was famous for going out and picking fights with Israeli soldiers in the hope of capturing something that they could blow up into a propaganda story. Do you know which? I forget the girl's name. Morgan, do you know this person? Do you know who I'm talking about?
I do. I don't know her name, I'm afraid. I could look it up, or perhaps Daniel could find it for us.
So what do you think of that? Yes, the civilian population is also been pursuing a massive propaganda campaign to further the Palestinian cause. They're recruits in this as well.
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, something that people are, well, not necessarily unfortunately, but something that people are really going to be uncomfortable about, that they're going to have to face, is that the Gazan population is not as lovely and clean as they would really like them to be. For one, the main reason is that there's a huge amount of anti-Semitism in that region generally, but very clearly in Gaza as well. Another example of this, which is, it's not on the level of a study per se, or quite as reliable as the election statistics perhaps, but there's a YouTube channel of a guy who goes around Israel and the West Bank and Gaza and asks people questions, things to do with like, when he's in Gaza, would you allow Jewish tourists to come here, and would you be happy with that? Would you want them to have full citizenship and all this kind of thing? And he asked it to both Israelis and Palestinians, right? And what's really shocking and about this is that the people in Gaza are overwhelmingly hostile, overwhelmingly not willing to have peace and not willing to have equal civil rights with Israelis. And there are some people on the Israeli side who are like that, but it's a much smaller amount. The overwhelming majority of Israelis are very clearly in favor of a kind of long-term peace, and that's very clearly what they want. Very much backing up the idea that you hear spoken a lot, that if Hamas put down their guns today, there would be peace. If Israel did it, there would be the obliteration of Israel, right? And I would encourage people to go up and look up those videos if you feel confused about this, because I think the population wants the continuation of this conflict. And it's another piece of evidence pointing to the fact that the population isn't as innocent as people would like to believe. There will be some of the population who is innocent. There'll be children, as Marcos said. There might even be some fully grown adults who have somehow imbibed a kind of liberal worldview who don't want this kind of thing. And that it's a tragedy that they're in danger. But pursuant to the goal of victory, Israel can't place these guys' interests ahead of their own. And that's unfortunately part of the nature of war. And, I hope those people aren't killed, but it's possible that they may well be.
There was an article in the Post recently about a Palestinian Arab who eventually ended up converting to Judaism, ran away from home when he was about 12 years old and stayed in Israel working construction until he was finally adopted by an Israeli man and eventually brought into the fold of Judaism and became a full Israeli citizen. But the stories that he tells, the abuse that he got from his father, for sympathizing with Jews, he was taught terrible things about Jews, that Jews want to murder you. The Jews have 3 legs. He actually thought Jews had 3 legs. And when he went into Israel for the first time with his father, who had worked construction in Israel, he would look around at the Jews for that third leg. This is the kind of crazy ignorance and like medieval stuff that is being taught to the kids out there. It's seeding the ground of the next generation, for the next generation of ignorant fanatics who are enraged and want to murder people just to murder them.
Yeah, just to back up the idea of how medieval it is, for a video I think we're kind of planning to do on the channel at some point in the next few weeks, I've been doing some research on the history of anti-Semitism in Europe. And I think it's Pope Innocent III, who was probably one of the most powerful medieval popes, I think in the 13th century, was very anti-Semitic. And one of the things he believed was that Judaism was a disease which you could catch by being in proximity to a Jew. Obviously a ridiculous kind of belief. But if you think about how similar that is, and this is from 800 years ago to what that kid was being taught, it's just how medieval some of these beliefs really are.
Well, you know, there's also a moral equivalence on the part of the pro-Palestinian people. They love to show videos of, you know, Israeli kids singing about, you know, hurting the Palestinians. They like to point out religious fanatics in Israel who think the same thing, that there should be an Israel that goes from the river to the sea and eliminate all Arabs. Marco and Richard, what do you guys say to this attempt at showing that the population of Israel is on the same moral plane, more or less, as the population of Gaza?
I think what's telling is the videos that aren't shown to different groups at different times. For example, the Hamas videos of children in the rubble is what's shown to Western countries. The Gazans' children in the rubble is what we see on the BBC all the time. But there's also Hamas videos of children of 8, 9, 10 years old being trained as mini Hamas militants at boot camps. Holding rifles, being shown attacking things and attacking Jews, chasing Jewish flags, all that kind of thing. That's not shown to a different group, where it would expose the fact that they are being educated, they are being trained from a very young age to be Jew killers, essentially.
Yes, I've seen interviews with children in the territories where they say very proudly that they want to grow up to stab a Jew. They want to run them down. They want to stab them.
And then off the back of that, people still equate children equals innocent. And a child raised under those circumstances with that kind of morality is simply going to reflect it by trying to kill the first Jew that he sees. So it's got to be honest, in the same way that hospital is seen as some place of healing, but if it also contains staff who are protecting terrorists or hiding hostages or hiding weapons, then it's not the equivalent of your hospital in London or New York anymore, is it? So
all this is morally self-evident, and yet they all evade these things. It's frightening. Mary Aline, thank you for your very, very generous contribution of $50. And she says, thank you so much for your excellent commentary and analysis. It appears that super chats that even name the two sides you're talking about cannot be posted. Okay, so all I can say is nothing less than victory. I agree 100%. Catherine, thank you for $4.99. And she also says, appreciate ARCUK for all of you who participate. And she gave us another $1.99. Thank you, Catherine, for coming on this objectivist journey with us. Daniel, for $5, the UNRWA enables a lot of this through the terrorist indoctrination system in Gaza they call schools. You guys have anything to say about that?
I'm not too familiar with exactly the details of it, but those kind of things exist basically in any totalitarian regime. I mean, again, just look at the Nazis. So youth indoctrination, I fully believe that that's what goes on. There's lots of very clear evidence when ISIS was in control of regions about their indoctrination of youth. There were some awful videos of kids that they would make do press-ups, and this guy holding a rifle would basically, when the kid got to the bottom of the press-up, would kick him in the chest to stand up. And it was this peculiar mix of kind of ideology and corporal punishment mixed together to create, I guess, their version of an ideal fighter. So there's a lot of contextual reason why I would believe that's probably taking the case with Hamas as well.
Sure. Well, it's not secret. All the money that Gaza has received in the last 20 years is being used to dig tunnels, to line them, to build weapons, to turn hospitals into depots for Hamas, and the purchase of Hamas themselves. All this kind of stuff is beyond doubt. We know that the attack on October the 7th must have been planned in the long term. It's not something you train for in a weekend. It must have taken months preparation, just getting all the equipment and organizing the whole assault. This is not something that you organize in a few days or a few weeks. This must have taken months, and taking months means that the population must have good chunk of the population must have been aware of it. Even the PLO, I think I saw a post or some kind of where they're saying, oh, the PLO should be in Gaza, and they responded, we are already there with 60,000 personnel. So, I mean, 60,000 people embedded in the government of Hamas means that there are very few innocent people left in Gaza, really, don't they?
And look at the evasion that's going on with the mothers in the UK or the mothers in America who have sympathy for the mothers in Gaza of murder of dead children killed in war. Those mothers in the UK and in America would not accept having rockets stored in their school playground. They would not accept having weaponry next to their nursery. Long before there's any conflict, they would just, that would be the point when you would say, no, this is not right. This is dangerous. This is making us at risk of being a target. So all of that is utterly evaded when then analysing the mothers in Gaza and what they're essentially permitting to happen on a daily basis that leads up to this.
And yeah,
nobody's putting any rocket-propelled grenades under my kid's crib, which they did find. Stuff like that. Go ahead, Mark. I'm sorry.
That's why important your reality check is about the morality of the whole thing, because people are distracted by the concrete, distracted by the picture of the kid in the rubble, distracted by this event or that event. But the fundamental thing is the morality of it all. If you ignore the principle behind it, then you can talk until the cows come home and never reach a decision of who's good, who's bad. Here, the issue is, as I said, black and white. If you look at the morality of it all, so I hope people watching the video you made will come to some sort of clarity. Of course, there are people that don't want to have the mind change, already made up their minds, whether because they are Muslim and Muslim whatever is good, or whether because they like evading and they live in evasion. But hopefully some people will see the point behind it.
And people need to think beyond these simple words like peace. If a country invades a neighbour and then everybody calls for peace and it's supposed to stop there, then there's still a bunch of victims that have been invaded, and you haven't achieved peace at all. You haven't achieved peace now. Peace is not just the absence of weapons firing at the moment, it's the absence of a long-term threat in favour of the just.
Indeed, and I think this was mentioned in the article that we had to read. Let's not forget that October 7th required a lot of collaboration on the part of the citizens, including people who worked in those kibbutzes, who were employed by the people that they eventually murdered, and were not only employed by them, but were helped by them, helped by in sending their children to Israeli hospitals when their children were sick. And those collaborators heartlessly gave intelligence to the Hamas fighters to go into those very regions where they earn their money and get their charitable contributions to murder the very people who are trying to help them. That's absolutely despicable. Mary Aline, member for 19 months, the U.S. gives dollars to Iran. Yes, we do. Another unfortunate result of moral pragmatism in our government. Totally insane. Iran supports what happened on October 7th. Also, there was advanced knowledge of October 7th not taken seriously. Yes, this is true too. Mary Aline for $2. Yes, absolutely black and white. I think all of us on this panel agree, but for others, it's a really complicated moral morass. They can't seem to work themselves through. Morgan, any final words you'd like to say before we bid our audience adieu today?
Just that another way, I think, that if people are struggling to get that the population, I think, is broadly in favor basically of everything that Hamas is doing, I think perhaps just new multiplicity of examples might be needed. If you go listen to that phone call of the fighter who called his mom and dad and were boasting about, mom, dad, I've killed a Jew, get mom, she'll be so proud of what her son has done.
He killed 10 of them. He killed 10 of them.
Yeah. And the parents don't hear this and they're not appalled. They're, it's, oh my God, my boy, how brilliant, how proud, it's completely awful. And these aren't people in a vacuum. These are people who are the product of a certain culture. and that is going to be widespread amongst the people there. And for all the other reasons we've mentioned, I think very clearly we don't have to guess that that's what it's like, that is very much what it's like. So I think people in the West shouldn't be fooled. The UK, you were mentioning people sending money, or I think Mary Elaine was. I think the UK, was it Rishi Sunak announced we sent 10 million in aid to Gaza, something awful like that. So yeah, these confusions, these ideas have very real world consequences.
Yes, what do you guys say, Marco and Richard?
I just wanted to comment on the military errors in terms of not recognizing the intel that could have prevented the October 7th attack, because not taking the threat seriously is part of having semi-altruistic thinking. If you're constantly giving the other side too much benefit of the doubt, if you're constantly giving the other side waiting for them to demonstrate their evil yet again before you act, then you're going to miss things such as the intel, which could have reduced the horrors of October 7th.
Yeah, and about the money we're giving to Gaza, well, we knew immediately as soon as David Cameron was brought back in the government in order to be foreign secretary. We know his track record. He made a hash of Syria, he made a hash of Libya, and he's been appeasing left, right, and center. So it was just a matter of time before he was going to come up with a stupid policy like that. And they don't have any moral compass to speak of. So they spread money around. They just spray it, hopefully, in order not to be accused of being on one side or the other. And that's just morally reprehensible and repellent.
What they're doing essentially is giving money to ensure greater peace on their own streets in their own cities back home. That's all that is. That's handing over £10 million so that Islamist supporters here in the streets of the UK don't create a ruckus.
Unfortunate. Yeah. Well, if you didn't know that our political class was feckless and stupid as hell, you know it now, folks. Ashley shrugged for 99 cents. Thank you, Ashley. Well, folks, I think that concludes the reality show for today. Don't forget to go to my Twitter page and click on my YouTube channel. You will see what gives Israel the right. A little video on what gives Israel the right to fight back unapologetically. I hope some IDF soldiers are watching this. I hope they're getting fortified by the message that we're giving them, that they are morally in the right. They're fighting for a good cause and need to see it through to its completion. They need that morale, because the rest of the world, including our leaders, will not give it to them. Well, folks, it's been great talking to you guys. Thank you, Marco and Richard. Thank you, Morgan. I hope to see you on the next reality show very soon. For everybody out there, always remember to check your premises. Peace.
Bye.
Recording stop.